So welcome everyone to those of you joining the room right now. We're going to be talking about how to use hypnotic language deliberately, purposefully to supercharge your life and all the connotations and meanings that come with that. I'm going to have to find a remote control to put my TV on mute that is live streaming this on YouTube. So Rowan, maybe if I put myself on mute and you give a bit of an introduction on how your week's been and what your take is on hypnotic language.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. I've had a pretty good week, really, this week. It's been busy trying to set up this course for memory. And I think, this is it's been an instrumental thing in the shift that I've gone from being quite severely anxious when I was younger and suffering from severe social anxiety to being able to talk to pretty much anyone in the street, anyone in the world that comes up to me or that I can go up to. And it's to do with the way I speak to myself in my mind. And I think the understanding the communication that's taught in hypnosis and NLP and persuasion is really a clean way of communicating your point to other people, and it allows you to sort of take a step back and think about what you're saying and how you want to put your point across, and also think about how the other side of the relationship, whether that's with your unconscious mind or with someone else, is going to interpret this language and process it for themselves. So I think getting to grips with how we use language and how to speak to the mind in an effective way to persuade our own mind and persuade other people's minds are massively important things. So I'd like to just thank everyone for joining us. And if anyone's got any questions or anything they'd like to add, just stick your hand up.
Yeah, definitely. Raise your hand. We'll get you up on stage. It could be a question for us. Both of us are hypnotists and obviously use language outside of a therapy room as well. Maybe you've got something you want to share, how you use hypnotic language, whether that's in a therapy room, maybe it's outside of a therapy room, but you find that hypnotic language very useful within that context. And also, if you are connected to maybe a hypnotist, hypnotherapist, coach, or someone that isn't a hypnotist but is in a different form of therapy, use the plus button at the bottom of the screen to ping maybe 2 or 3 other people that might also benefit from this conversation. But we are talking about hypnotic language, and I think there is a big crossover between hypnosis and communication in general, because effectively the tool of the hypnotist is really the words we use and the way in which we use them. So therefore, it stands to reason that naturally good communicators are probably using hypnotic language without knowing it, and very good hypnotists are using just generally good communication skills to bring about results that wouldn't necessarily need to be trained in hypnosis training, but just by using certain things that we take for granted. And my reference point for this is my mum, who had no hypnotic training whatsoever. She worked in various sales roles. She worked for a radio station selling advertising, various different sales roles. And there was a few things that she did that as a child, I thought they were bizarre. So one of the things that she did was mimic the accent of anyone that she was talking to. I would hear her on the phone. This is way before mobile phones. And I had a great auntie in Sunderland. And within 2 or 3 minutes, she had a Sunderland accent. And I thought it was a piss take. I thought she was mimicking the people that she was talking to. For her, it was just an unconscious response because she had figured out that she built rapport easier and quicker when she kind of mimicked the people that she was talking to. It wasn't a conscious, deliberate act, but she was just doing that. And I think those intuitive skills made her very good at influence and sales, but she didn't learn this in a book, in a classroom. She just kind of picked it up. And I think there's very much an evolutionary element to communication. We do stuff that works and we do less of stuff that doesn't work, particularly if we are in environments where success has some kind of consequence. And I think therapy is a bit like sales and business, in the sense that those that do it well are rewarded with more clients and more recognition and more referrals. And those that aren't so good at using communication tend to not do as much. And therefore, it becomes a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Rowan, what's your take in terms of the overlap, if we're looking at it as a Venn diagram, just in terms of hypnotic language and just good communication skills in general? How much of that overlaps, do you think?
I think there's a really big overlap there. I think any sort of good communication really is a form of hypnotic communication. If we look at hypnosis as being a form of focus, which I think you'll agree that it is, then we need to have that focus in communication for us to understand the communication. If we're off drifting and thinking about something else and not paying attention to what's being said, then the communication is not going to be as clean as it could be. And, like you talking about your mother actually sprung a memory of my mother and father, which is back early in my sort of learning of hypnosis. And I started to realize that one of the main problems between my mother and father's communication was their language, and the fact that they spoke completely different languages on a submodality level. And it meant that they were saying the same thing half the time, but weren't communicating. And I used this in finance. When I started to notice this, I realized that a lot of the different teams in the businesses that I was working in were saying the same thing, but using different language. And I think being able to understand that and see the differences within people's language and balance that and work as a sort of mediator between the different areas and different people's language systems allowed me to progress through finance a lot faster than I maybe would have if I hadn't noticed that issue with language. So I think there's a huge overlap here.
Yeah, I would agree. And obviously you've got submodalities, but you've also got the broader category of submodalities in terms of the predicates. So, for those people maybe more familiar with hypnosis and less with NLP, there is this idea that there are primary ways of thinking. Obviously, we use all of our senses in terms of communication, but some people are more visual thinkers, and therefore their language patterns will involve more things like, I see what you're saying, I see what you mean, and more visual representations. And normally you can tell these kind of people because they use hand gestures a lot to explain what's going on. They're effectively explaining their inner world externally. And sometimes, these hand gestures don't make sense to someone if they're primarily kinesthetic or auditory, and that's their primary predicate that they use to communicate or understand. And one of the key practical applications that I found setting up my PR company at the age of 23 is that sometimes in the element of influence, it's quite useful to have a feedback question to figure out if what you've communicated actually makes sense. And I would identify that some people would have a primary feedback question, which could be things like, do you see what I'm saying? Do you see what I mean? Or do you hear me? And what I found is that each of those have a presupposition of a predicate of the person that you're communicating to that you may not know at that point in time. So I myself find myself saying a lot of the times, does that make sense? Because it's a sensory predicate neutral saying. It doesn't matter if someone's visual, auditory, or kinesthetic. I still get a head nod or some kind of validation as to whether or not my communication makes sense. And sometimes I say it too much. Does that make sense? But it becomes two things. One, it's an opportunity for me to change my language. And one of the presuppositions I love about from NLP is this idea that, the purpose of the communication is the response you get, because it really gives the element of responsibility to you as an individual rather than the person that you're communicating to. And I think a lot of people blame the other person for not understanding what they're saying or misinterpreting an intention. But if you really believe that the purpose of your communication can be flexible depending on a feedback loop, and metaphorically speaking, I love sonar as a metaphor here. So when you think of bats and dolphins, they decide how they navigate, not based on the clicks and the whistles that they send out into the ocean or into the air, but they move depending on what bounces back. And I think that's an excellent metaphor for communication, because then you can be more fluid with that. So does that make sense? I think does two things. One, it gives you the ability to be flexible and apply feedback. But secondly, it gets people into that yes set. it gets people constantly either saying, thinking, or nodding yes, which for a hypnotist or someone in the world of business is an excellent tool to supercharge anyone's life, because the more you can influence people to your way of thinking, the more your life looks like how you want it to look. Rowan, I'm just conscious we haven't addressed the elephant in the room, and Graham's going to hate me calling him an elephant, but I feel like I have to at this point. He's not here. He's actually having a great old time, I think in Reading Festival. Is that where he is, Rowan?
Yeah, I believe he's dancing away front left at Reading Festival just now. Having a blast.
He is indeed. So Graham isn't here, but he's piled the pressure on us. He said, look, don't let us down. We need more people in the room than ever before. And he'll be listening into the recording of the YouTube just to make sure that standards aren't slipping when he's not here. So please, given that we're going to be strictly evaluated by Graham, please raise your hand if you've got anything to say about how you use language. Could be hypnotic language or just powerful language patterns that you find really useful. And in particular, what I'm really interested in is any anecdotes of how you've noticed different inner dialogue changing, the way in which you speak to yourself. Because I was just talking to Rome just before we went live, and some of you know this, some of you don't, but when I was 19 years old, I was a recluse for about 8 months, didn't really go outside. And when I think back to that, a lot of my anxiety came from my inner dialogue, which was giving me lots of reasons why things would fail, lots of scary things that would happen, overanalyzing consequences. And when my inner dialogue was all doom and gloom and kind of very slow tonality and kind of a presupposition of failure or danger, I didn't do a lot. And now when I think about my inner dialogue, it's almost like I've got a motivational speaker inside my own head, constantly telling me what I can do and how things could work out. Not in a positivity for the sake of positivity way, but it just raises my energy levels, makes me highly resourceful and gets me doing stuff, which I think is a better way to kind of do stuff. So raise your hand if you've got a question or some kind of thing that you want to share, or maybe it's a phrase that you use in terms of hypnotic language with clients. You find that really effective. Rowan, is there particular language patterns that you use in the therapy room that you just find are just little stock phrases that really help other people supercharge their life?
I think there's a couple of things that sort of popped in my mind as you've been speaking. First of all, the sonar, that's brilliant. And I actually used this when I was back in finance. I was trying to get onto the roof to take photographs of Edinburgh Castle from Lothian Road, which is a really weird angle. And I knew you could get access to the 7th floor balcony at Standard Life. So I wrote a letter to the building manager who I knew had just changed. And I thought about all of those sonar responses that she could give me to say no, and countered them all in that initial email. And they gave me access straight away. And I'd spoken to the previous building manager about this, and they were like, no, you're not going to get access. There's no way we'll ever give you access. But just by thinking about what those responses would be, so the sort of the sonar ping back, as you say, was really beneficial in cleaning up that communication to a point where I could persuade them to let me on the roof to take some pretty photographs. I think in regards to my own struggles with mental health and anxiety over the years, one of the things that worked really well for me that I still use with clients is the idea of positive programming. And this is a technique from Tony Robbins, I believe. And it's not positive mental attitude. It's not looking for a silver lining in anything. It's just using the positive statement of I just successfully ... And using that religiously for a couple of weeks, it creates an observer effect within your own mind where you can effectively laugh at stuff straight away. So if you say, like, I just successfully crashed my car, you can sort of chuckle at yourself in that language instead of feeling hurt by it or the fact that you've damaged your car. And it does create this sort of disassociation, so it can be potentially detrimental to use it long term, but for a couple of weeks to just get your mind into that state of being constantly using that positive voice, I think it's a really, really powerful little technique, and it certainly shifted my language. And I think being careful about the words that you use as well, and really thinking about language and how it works. So I use the term responsibility a lot with my clients. but I put a pause in it, responsibility. And just by putting that pause in it, it allows them to see it in a new way and understand that, wait a second, I can be responsible to something. That doesn't actually necessarily mean that I caused the problem. It means I'm responsible for the solution. And I think that's a really powerful little technique.
Yeah, I really like that. And for me, what I found naturally me using as a language, rather than trying to guess the resource that the client would benefit most, motivation, enthusiasm, determination, resilience, I find myself using resourceful, because it's a catch-all, and then the recipient of that is going to take whatever resourceful means to them, and probably the resource that is most useful for them within the context. So now, as part of an induction, I'll say, I tend to use an element of progressive relaxation just to kind of get them focusing inwards. But I say you're breathing in a relaxing, resourceful sensation. The more relaxed and resourceful you feel, the more tension goes away. And that tends to, just almost law of dominant effect. You can't feel two conflicting emotions simultaneously. So if someone's feeling relaxed and resourceful, they tend not to also feel stressed or anxious or worried and those kind of things. So that language, and I think all good hypnotists tend to naturally use presuppositions in the way that they're intended to, which is, an expectation of the suggestion that you want them to have is going to take place. So, I think, a tool really, if we're using hypnotic language, not necessarily the words that you use, but the presupposition of the words that you use tends to have ramifications above and beyond, what that is. And that maps across very well with things like, negotiation, influence, things like that. And one of my favorite books on influence, I'd probably say there's two, and both of them I use in the therapy room, even though they're not really designed for therapists. I don't know if you've heard of Robert Cialdini, who wrote a book in late 90s called, I think it was the Art and Science of Influence. Incredible book, but effectively this is all academically backed studies about how you influence people, so that these principles that, people in the world of influence knew for a long time, like reciprocity or law of commitment, or in sales, sometimes you'll hear language like highball and lowball and things like that. But he actually did the studies to figure out why this works and to what extent it worked. And one of the most interesting anecdotes in this book is he had a study where he would get people trying to queue jump, people queuing up to use the photocopy machine. And in one of the groups, he would get people saying, can I get to the front? I need to use a photocopier. And in the second group, so effectively that was the control group, he added one word, and that one word makes the difference. And I've asked loads of people this. I said, what word do you think it is? And they say, it could be please, it could be must, really emphasizing need. And it turns out the word that had a really big impact in terms of influence is the word because. And that when people said, can I jump in front because I'm in a rush, that had some incredibly higher statistic of people being compliant with that than if they just said, can I go in front? I'm in a rush, and just didn't have the word because. And one of my mantras that I use all the time is that people are reasonable when you give them reasons. And for me, because has the presupposition that the reason is already there and is a valid reason. So if you say, and you'll do this because, it pretty much doesn't matter what follows the word because. The fact that because is there, people accept that the reason is valid and genuine, and therefore increases the likelihood of people actually doing the thing. So I find this as a therapist, not just giving people suggestions, but giving people suggestions followed by the word because and a reason that doesn't necessarily make any logical sense, but it does increase the likelihood that that suggestion will stick. if that makes any sense. And that was a feedback question there as well. Predicate neutral,
Yeah.
Rowan.
Totally makes sense. The because, and also now, there are words that your mother used when you were a little boy.
True.
Or a little girl. It's like, clean your room because I said so. Now, she does it, and you just go and do it. There's a piece in the Book of the Law where Aleister Crowley, and I'm not a big fan of his work, but it's just an interesting little thing that popped in my head there. And he says, now accursed upon because and his kin, may because be accursed forever. If Will stops and cries why, invoking because, then Will stops and does not. And this is a really important aspect of this, because a lot of people that are having problems with having willpower issues or sticking points in their life are using this word in a negative way within their own mental chatter. And they're saying, oh, I can't do this because, and they're putting the power outside them as soon as they start to use that word. So I think it's really important to bring up this word, because it is a real power word for influence and persuasion, and it's constantly being used in a negative way in people's minds. So I think it's a really good one to touch on.
And I think this is the thing that has been a trend in recent conversations over the weeks, and that is that hypnosis isn't something that only happens in a therapy room. Hypnosis is happening all the time. And I would say the majority of hypnosis is the hypnosis we do by ourselves, to ourselves, quite often involving in a dialogue. So when you've got all these powerful language patterns where you've got presuppositions or you're using tonality in a certain way, the same things that could supercharge your life can actually drain all of the energy, the passion, the resources out of your life, because it's not a binary response. It's on a spectrum. So the very things that can supercharge it can actually take it away from that. And anyone that knows someone that is clinically depressed or has bouts of depression will notice those submodality differences in tonality, in body language. And I don't think it's an unrealistic hypothesis that the way they speak externally is probably similar to how they're speaking in their inner dialogue. And therefore, if you've got very slow language, if a lot of the tonality has a presupposition of failure or hopelessness and that kind of stuff, I think sometimes the thing that annoys me sometimes when you see the Tony Robbins characters, that while I agree, yes, all emotional states are created by ourselves, I think there is an element of, almost toxic positivity there and shaming of people. Well, if you are depressed, it's your fault. And I think fault is a very big distinction from responsibility. If you feel that at some level you've created that emotional state, that's quite empowering, because then it feels like you can do something else, a different strategy to create a different emotional state. Whereas if it's like, well, you don't have to feel this way, and therefore you've created this, well, for someone that is depressed, they're probably going to feel even more depressed, because now they're depressed as to how they can't figure out a way out of the maze inside their own head to have some kind of different tonality or inflections or positivity. But it is important, I think, for people to become more aware of how they communicate to themselves, their inner dialogue, as well as, the dialogue that they have, outwards. And I think when you are aware of that, I think is also important, if we take this presupposition of, the purpose of your communication is a response that you get and there's no failure, only feedback. Well, then at some level, you do need an opportunity to test communication, to see what different responses you get. And for me, being a very shy, introverted child, unfortunately, I didn't get much opportunity to practice communicating. So I was a shit communicator. And I actually needed to learn communication skills outside of the normal ways that people learn communication. So for me, it was through books and business life. And luckily I found that so that I could actually acquire some skills that I didn't have up to that point. But I do think there is this kind of fear almost of experimenting with language, with tonality, with vocabulary, using metaphors and things like that. And the problem with that is that if you keep doing what you've always done, you can keep getting what you've always got. And that, I think, experimental attitude of trying out different things, such an important part, because what might work for someone else won't necessarily work for you. And I think if we all go around trying to talk like Tony Robbins, we're just going to look weird and annoy people. So you've got to find your own way of how you express enthusiasm or determination or whatever it might be. Conscious that we're talking a lot, Rowan, which either means there's a few nervous people in the audience that have something to say, but they haven't raised their hand yet. So my presupposition is when someone raises their hand, we'll invite them up and have a good old chat with them. I'm just wondering who that's going to be. There's a few people I can see in the audience here that I know have got really insightful things to say about communication and how they use language. Jessica, I'm going to try and bait you to raise your hand here, because I'm willing to bet that in order to get to champion level kickboxer, you probably noticed some inner dialogue changes that got you to a point where you were able to do that you didn't have before. So if you want to raise your hand, comment on that. We'd love to have you up. If anyone else has got something they want to share or ask about hypnotic language, how you use hypnotic language, particularly out of the therapy room, raise your hand. We'd love to hear you. Rowan, let's look while people are raising their confidence levels to raise that. Oh, here we go, Jessica. Welcome. My baiting and presuppositions worked.
As you called me out, I thought I'd better raise my hand. I'm going to have to begin by saying I wasn't fully listening to everything that you said before this moment.
I'm devastated.
How do I use language outside of the therapy room? Is that the question?
Two parts to the question, really, Jessica. So one, for those that don't know you, you're a kickboxing champion. And my question was, did you notice that your inner dialogue, how you communicate to yourself, just in your own mind, changed at the point where you became more determined to get to kind of raise your levels to let's say supercharge your life? And also, second part of the question, how do you use perhaps hypnotic language outside of a therapy room, and in what context do you find that useful?
So yes, my performance as a kickboxer changed when I began to change my beliefs in my ability. And so I called my business I Am Fighting Fit for the very personal reason that I always battled with this belief that I would never be fit enough. So in all of my training, I was fighting this feeling of whatever I did, it wasn't enough and I had to do more. So yes, it pushed me, but then I would go back to my coach in the corner of the fight, and I'd say, I'm losing because I'm not fit enough. I'm losing, I can't win, I'm not fit enough. So guess what? I lost the fight because I wasn't fit enough. Physically, I had done the training, but I didn't believe it was enough, so I lost. And then I still haven't worked out exactly how and what switched in my mind, because it was before I discovered hypnosis. But it was just something, I think it was because it was on short notice. I took the title fight with 3 weeks, and I just decided, this is it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to give it everything, and I'm going to give it my absolute best and come away a champion. And it was that belief that led me to succeed, that then led me to go self-employed and decide to dedicate to the coaching, that then led me to the hypnosis and the hypnotherapy. And so then and that's led me to discover that fighting and the communication that you have as a coach with a student or a fighter or any martial artist, any athlete, is hypnotic in itself. Because when I'm in that ring and my coach says something to me, I don't consciously consider what they say and how I'm going to do it. I do it automatically. I do it without thinking. And I've noticed it more and more when I'm coaching students in classes or fighters in the ring. You give that command, suggestion, and they do it. So you practice it in all of your training. You practice this communication between coach and fighter so that when you're in the ring, you can perform. And that applies across from sport and fighting to speaking or anything really, any area. Did that answer the question?
It certainly does. And I think, for me, listening to that language pattern there, you didn't say to yourself, I could do it, I could give it my best, or I might. It was, I'm going to put everything into this. I'm going to give it my all. I'm going to give it my best. And that going to, I think, is, a very different internal representation of your desire and your outcome than a presupposition of perhaps failure. You didn't say, I'm going to try, which has that presupposition of failure. I'm going to. Well, that has a presupposition of success. So consciously or unconsciously, the very language that you chose there, I think certainly influenced the resources that you got into. Would it have been the defining factor to make you win or lose? Well, that's going to come down to lots of other variables like the training, the opponent, all those other things. But I certainly don't think it did any harm. What's your take on did it feel like a conscious choice of using that particular type of language, or was it very intuitive?
It was very intuitive at the time. So now I'm 10 days out from my British title, and this is after having had all the lockdowns out of training and my fitness dropping and everything, because I was like everybody else. I wasn't in the gym, and I wasn't so dedicated to my fighting that I kept it up at home. I decided I was going to focus on the hypnosis and the business side of things. But then this opportunity came up, and I had a decision to make about 16 weeks to go now. And I decided to do it. I decided, okay, this is going to be tough. I'm going to have to do the training. I know how to do it, but I'm ready. I'm ready to put the work in, and I am going to step in that ring in the best possible position to become that British champion. So here I am 10 days out now, and I have actively worked on it throughout the last 8 weeks. And it's not perfect. Nothing ever is. The last week or so, I've hit that point where I've gone, oh no, have I done enough? Am I fit enough? But now I am consciously aware of when these feelings come up. When I feel that fear, I sit with it. And I was actually listening to Laurie Hammond earlier, and she quoted someone else who I can't remember. And they said that a feeling, an emotion only lasts 90 seconds. So you can allow it, you can feel it, even fear or depression or whatever it might be. If you sit with it and allow it to pass, you can then change it, and you can choose to change your response. So when I feel it, I then focus on what I'm working towards, what I'm going to achieve. And I've noticed that is massively beneficial. Whereas I used to spiral into the worst case scenarios of, well, what if and comparison's a big one, because you are fighting another human being who is also doing their best. So I've always found it's very easy to go in well, what is she doing? What if she's training harder than me? What if she's fitter? What if she's better? Now I don't allow that. I just say, doesn't matter what she's doing, I am doing my best.
I like that. And obviously for those people familiar with Dilt's logical levels, I am is really influencing, beliefs at the identity level rather than your behavior level or, levels, further down the hierarchy. So, the fact that you've called your brand, I am and linked that to your business, clearly means that there's probably a lot of what you do that really you kind of indicate at the identity level. It's you rather than your behavior or what you're doing, which I really like. And also, there was an absolute within tonality here. We got lots of hypnotists here. They'll recognize that tonality. That I've decided was very finite, as a decision should be. It wasn't, you're still at the consideration stage, and I think the power of a decision means you cut off any other alternative. So clearly, the way you're communicating to us, I'm again guessing, is probably similar to how you communicate to yourself. Not surprising you're winning all these championships and highly resourceful because of the very language pattern that you have. So well done, and best of luck for this match you've got coming up.
Thank you. And it all ties into what I want to do. I'm very interested in communication. And so my vision and where I want to go, I don't want to continue fighting. I have accepted this, and I have done everything that I need to do, and I am prepared. But I want to speak on stages globally. I want to be able to communicate what I have done and how I got here. So thank you. That means a lot.
More than welcome. Bob, welcome up to the stage. Great to have you here.
Hi guys, how are you?
Fantastic, Bob. How are you?
I'm doing great, boys. Really enjoyed listening to Jessica there. That was actually ridiculously inspirational, wasn't it? Guys, I'm thinking of going back into the ring. Jessica's thinking of calling it a day. I'm going back into the ring. Thank you, Jessica. It's lovely. So, should I talk about some stuff?
Totally, Bob. Yeah. Any questions, observations, like how you use language patterns?
Well, it's an interesting one. I'll talk for just a wee bit about part of it, and I'll change it a little bit slightly if I can. For me, there's two types of hypnotic language or patterns. The first one is self. The hypnotic language or patterns that I would have used most of my life on myself. The other one is clients that I do now every day to day on a daily basis. Self, that's me going right back to the 1970s, where my heroes were Napoleon Hill, William Clement Stone, Dale Carnegie, Viktor Frankl, all the wonderful things that they gave me, Think and Grow Rich, Success Through Positive Mental Attitude, Success System Never Fails, good old Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, and Mindsets for Me, all that stuff I swallowed down. And I really got involved in it. I got involved in hypnotic language and the patterns. I trained with Richard in the old NLP thing through the 70s, and I was always careful of the language I used. But I think I had a huge moment in my life when I was in I senior managerial role, you might want to call it. It doesn't matter, that's not important. But around about the mid-80s, I would have been pretty much known as a really, really positive guy, and a guy who would have watched his language, and I would have trained people in it. And I used to have a thing, for example, I would not allow any of my team to use the word problem. Get quite annoyed with them. And I'd tell them, don't let me hear you say that word ever again. You don't have a problem, you have a challenge. And they would smile. They'd be inspired by this. The same as I was when somebody, had given it to me some years earlier. We don't have problems, we have challenges. Problem's a problem. It's a nightmare, but a challenge. Very exciting. And I held up for a couple of years, but there was a huge moment in my life when I looked at this language that I used a lot. And I realized, you know what? I don't think I personally need them anymore. I think it's right that I train and use this language with other people coming through as I came through. I needed that at that time. But right now, I consider myself to be skillful enough that the word problem should not be a problem for me, if that makes sense. I mean, I handle problems for a living. So why would the word problem be any kind of a challenge, a problem for me in any way, shape or form? So I started intentionally using the word problem, but smiling at it, if that makes sense. And I discovered that nothing mattered, that I was okay. I was fine. I'd gone through a really rough, not rough, but a really hard-working 10 years. My positive mental attitude was really sharp. I ended up working for one of these gentlemen I mentioned earlier, the guy who, along with Napoleon Hill, wrote the Success System That Never Fails, William Clement Stone. And I just became this person who was really okay with it all. Today, just finished doing a case an hour before I came on here, and I would have been using all these skills that I have with that client. But it's nice to be able to be in a place after a while where you think, I couldn't imagine myself now needing to use that language with myself, because I've kind of got it off pat now. I still have challenges now and again. There I go again. Still have challenges now and again, not problems, but I believe I can handle it. And I can. In fact, that's one of my questions. What's the worst possible thing that can happen here? And the second question is, but can I handle it? And my answer is always a big, like these letters in Hollywood, big white letters, Y-E-S, yes. And I feel good about that. But I'm trained to feel good about that, because that's the way I've been handling myself all that years, kind of writing these positivity scripts inside my head so that now they really are me, they're a part of my life. I hope some of that makes sense. Is that okay?
I mean, it totally makes sense. And, that's the element of, repetition plus intensity, becomes automatic. Those neural pathways just know how to get there themselves. So, you've kind of hardwired yourself to kind of think that way. So it's not as necessary for you to challenge yourself on, language patterns that put you in an unresourceful state. And I think that's fantastic, because I think with hypnotherapists, the way in which we communicate ourselves echoes out to how we communicate with clients. So all of that, self-talk, and your own way of thinking, Bob, inevitably is going to end up in the minds of your clients that you're working with, which I think is fantastic. So I appreciate your point there. Doreen, welcome up on stage.
Thank you. I'd like to say hello to Jess. I definitely didn't miss you now. Anyway, so just going back a little bit to the negative self-talk. Well, I'm definitely familiar with that, and the way I got out of it was listening to Abraham Hicks. We've talked about this last time, and they have like the emotional scale. So the lowest emotions, definitely have the low vibration, and have very negative self-talk, and you sort of gradually can speak yourself up with your own language. And it's like if you have, but they sort of explain that a belief is a thought that you have thought many of times. So a thought is a negative belief is a proof that you have had a thought that you've thought for a very long time. So that's sorry, it's a bit late and I'm not English speaking, but so it's a neural pathway that has formed, it's over a long time, and so repetition has been going on there, and definitely repetition is something that is gonna take you out of it. And on the other hand, they say so about this is my experience as well. If you feel bad, an affirmation is not going to work, because it's like it's completely in it's so far out from what it's not congruent. Let's just say that, And I think it's the same way. If you're going to work with other people, you have to be congruent. You have to believe what you say, and you have to believe that what you say is going to have an impact on them. It's going to change them. And so that's what I think. Anyway,
I think it's really valuable, because I think that's one of the bits that I think there is a disconnect. And sometimes you do see that where people are regurgitating maybe other people's tonality or words or phrases. And because it lacks that congruency, there is that disconnect. And not only are you not convincing yourself, but you're not convincing anyone else either. And that's why repetition alone, as you quite rightly said, Doreen, isn't sufficient. It has to align with, other beliefs. It can't conflict with anything. Otherwise, I forget who said it, but, affirmation without discipline is delusion. You have to kind of back it up. It has to actually kind of link with stuff. But I think that intensity of it, certainly is going to add to congruency if it's authentic. And if it is authentic, it's going to have, really powerful impact. Whereas if, I think it was Brian Tracy, one of the more, cheesy personal development guys, his tip for kind of getting into that kind of high vibrational state was to look at yourself in the mirror and say, I like myself, I like myself, I like myself. But if you say that 100 times on kind of almost like a parrot, like a very low energy, I don't necessarily think that would work. I think it would probably have the opposite effect that it's intended to. Rowan, what's your take?
Yeah, the affirmation thing's an interesting one. I think that you need to elicit an emotional peak within yourself as you're doing the affirmations. The affirmation, if you say it without feeling, it's not going to have an impact. And I think a lot of the negative behaviors that we have, the negative self-talk that we have, quite often is actually out of conscious awareness initially. And it's really a hypnotic loop that's sort of feeding itself. So a lot of the times when I'm dealing with clients, I'll ask them, has this problem been getting more difficult as you've got older? And I think seeing something that tends to cause more problems and get more difficult for the client or the individual as they get older in life, as their timeline gets more progressed, is really a sort of an indication that it's a belief or a negative talk that's self-fulfilling itself. So it's a hypnotic loop that's getting stronger and stronger. So the first stage is really to notice that you're in a loop with it, and then start to be aware of the language that you're using within yourself. And then to break your state and give yourself an affirmation is a really powerful way of like hijacking that loop and breaking out of it. So I think to use those affirmations in that sort of way is a really powerful. So yeah, it's a really powerful way of working. So just like look at yourself in the mirror and laugh, and break your state, and then give yourself the affirmations, and it'll work a lot better. I used to have, I think it's something you spoke about before, was a list of things that I'm proud of achieving. So whenever I felt down, I would break my state by reading through that list, and then I would have 10 affirmations that I would read through 3 times, and that was my way of sort of working with this.
Yeah, totally. Because I mean, at a very basic level, an affirmation is just a suggestion, and if you give someone a suggestion, but they're in let's say a very low intensity state, well, that suggestion isn't connected to an emotion, so it's not really going to have the same kind of response. Whereas if someone gets a taste, and I think that's why future pacing is such a powerful thing, because if they get a taste of what they're aiming to achieve or what the suggestion is going to help them with, that's going to create that kind of emotional intensity. Then linking it to a suggestion is going to have more impact than just giving them a suggestion, which could just easily be, kind of forgotten or washed off. And I think another principle of hypnotic language that I think a lot of people that particularly have spent a bit of time, learning about NLP, is the meta model, which, for a lot of people, they're operating from an inner dialogue or to each other, where they're accepting false presuppositions as if they're true. I'm no good. I'm not good enough. I'll never be able to do that. But they're not using the meta model principles of challenging any of these language patterns. According to whom? Based on what evidence? Not good enough to do what? And because they're not breaking their own patterns, you're right. They're caught in these loops to make it virtually impossible, because they're constantly giving themselves basically a feed of self-hypnosis suggestions, which are going to be limiting in some way. So I think, something that's useful to do, and I've not kind of relearned some of the basic meta model elements for a while, but it's a good practice to do. You don't want to do it to the point where you annoy everyone around you, but at the same time, there is some useful principles in there. Shaquille, welcome to the stage. Do you have a question or something you want to share?
Well, so a couple of observations and a question as well, actually. By the way, I'm really sorry I missed out. I turned up a little late. I would love to have heard Jessica. She sounds like an extremely dangerous lady as well, actually. But yeah, fantastic to be in the presence of a British champion. So, for the guys that don't know me, I'm a sales trainer, and I've never really linked what I do to putting people in a hypnotic state or anything like that. And I know as a sales trainer, we talk about language that has influence, but I just wanted to ask, am I doing hypnosis without realizing it? Because I know I'm pretty good at negotiating and getting people to do what they need to do so that they do business with me, but in an ethical way. I don't, I'm never swung a clock or anything like that in front of anybody's eyes, and I've never ever really thought about sort of influential language being a part of hypnosis. But is there an element of that going on, do you think, then, or is that involved?
Yeah, I mean, the bit that you missed in the beginning, Shaquille, is where we talked about the overlap between good communication and hypnotic language, and the consensus was, yeah, there's a pretty big overlap. So as someone competent in sales, you probably build rapport rapidly. I know you personally, so I know that's the case. You're naturally quite good at pacing and leading, which is that element of acknowledging where someone is, in the moment, and then leading them to perhaps an emotional state where they're excited, or creating that desire, which is a part of the sales process and a lot of different things. Well, that's an emotional state that you're accessing before giving them the suggestion or negotiating with them. So I think that good salespeople would make naturally good hypnotists, and I think a lot of hypnotists that are very competent could actually make very good salespeople. Before I became a hypnotherapist, I spent 15 odd years running a PR agency that involves business to business sales. And what I found is that when I became, a hypnotherapist and worked a lot with clients, a lot of the language patterns that made me good at sales actually made me a good hypnotist as well, because it is an appreciation of using language in a deliberate way to get an outcome. And this misconception that you need to, dangle a pocket watch in front of someone's eyes to induce an induction. Well, the thing is, as a salesperson or a sales trainer, Shaquille, the moment that you ask someone to go inwards, you're getting them into a light trance. So if you naturally use phrases like, look, imagine how good it's going to feel when you have this thing or you experience this thing. And timeshare salespeople are very good at this. They get people going inwards, imagining that future experience. That's kind of hypnotic language. That is hypnosis. What's your thoughts, Rowan?
Yeah, I think that's a future pace if ever I heard one, isn't it? I think the whole idea of sales, I mean myself as well, I came from selling kilts to tourists and then selling ideas for process changes to finance and then into hypnosis. So I think, understanding that we are using sales language, we're selling ideas to customers, to clients, and we're looking at their model of reality and effectively seeing, what's their map and how can we install new pieces of architecture into that map so they can have a better life. And this is effectively what a good salesperson does as well. They're selling them a product that they actually need rather than a product that they want to sell them. The really good salespeople will sell you something that's useful for you. And I'm sure Bob will maybe chime in on that because I know he's got a history in insurance sales. But that's really more of a selling someone a bet whether you're going to crash your car or die. But
yeah, hi, Lauren. It's interesting. I really enjoyed listening to what Shaquille said there. I was saying to myself, well, no, bless him, he's lovely, but he can't hypnotize. He doesn't have the skill set for that. I bet he's got the talent, by the way. I mean, we have a saying, though, as you know, when I'm teaching people, I say, I can give you the skills, but I can't give you the talent. Shaquille would be the exact opposite, I would imagine. I bet he's got the talent, but he doesn't have the skills. But he could learn that. He could learn that pretty well, I would imagine. But what I meant to say was, I would put forward an argument very easily that Shaquille is not. I mean, he can't hypnotize, and he's not. So he cannot is the answer. But I would step away and come forward again and immediately argue against myself and say, yes, Shaquille definitely hypnotizes. Yeah, and I think both of these arguments would be correct. The difference is he just needs stuff. Yeah, and once he's got the stuff, then that's what happens. The best salespeople in the world, I agree with what you guys are saying, are salespeople. In fact, for a living, that's what I do. I sell people on ideas. How about that? And that is a clinical hypnotist. So how about that? Me and Shaquille were probably walking hand in glove.
That's fantastic. And Shaquille, if you are interested in terms of mapping across certain hypnotic language into the area of sales, there's a book by Richard Bandler, one of the founders of NLP, modeled a lot of people in the realm of therapy, including Milton Erickson, largely considered one of the fathers of modern hypnotherapy, along with a guy called John Laval, called Persuasion Engineering. So a lot of the principles there are effectively using hypnotic language, tonality, but also this idea of precision elicitation. So asking very specific questions and then seeing how they represent those things. And there's a different response if you ask for someone's likes to their needs, and they'll represent them and even have them in different locations. So he uses a metaphor of almost like a hologram of this kind of, by hand gestures and where their eyes go, the representation of where these things are important. And observing, I think, as well, non-verbal cues to see what kind of state they're in to anchor those states. So if you are interested in having additional skills, as Bob quite rightly said, to add to the skills that you already have there, persuasion engineering would be a very useful toolkit to add to the toolkit that you already had.
Yeah, Adam, thank you for that, guys. All three of you who contributed on that. Bob, I like your perspectives, and I will look up the book that you mentioned there, Adam. Bob, I was going to say my background as well was financial services. And the reason I asked the question is that, I back in 1992, I picked up sales really, really fast. And because I was just keen, here's the thing, I had no money, I had no choice, I had to either learn fast or sink and die. And I remember in one of my early sales, the couple came in, very adamant they weren't going to buy anything. We've not come here to buy, we're just come here to learn and sort of find out and get information. I said, fine, take a seat. I thought, right now, I'll show them what I can do. And I was still a trainee, but I was hungry because, well, actually, I was literally hungry. I hadn't eaten all day. So, because I never had any money, I used to walk 6 miles to the office and walk 6 miles back, and nobody knew. And I'd change my shoes and put my trainers on, so I saved my work shoes. And afterwards, they ended up buying, and they actually spent quite a lot with me. And then they sat down and said, they actually said this. They said, are you a hypnotherapist? Because we didn't want any of this, and now we've walked out with all these investment plans and saving plans, and they'd spent literally a couple of £100 with me, which back in '93, I think it was like quite a lot of money. And I sat down, I thought, and I really didn't know what to make of this, because I remember the question, have you hypnotized us? Because we didn't want any of this. I said, I know you didn't want any of this, but you've obviously seen the sense of what I do, and you know, you don't want to leave here empty-handed. And I said, I understand that. That's, you know, I said, you're literally like 90% of the people who come and see me. Nobody ever wants to leave empty-handed from here. And they just laughed. And I went away thinking about what they'd said to me afterwards. And that's why I asked the question about, am I hypnotizing people? And now I've got my answer from Bob. But, you know, that's not my skill. That's not my skill set. But it's probably something I could develop. It's not my priority at the moment, but you know, it is what you guys do. It is an incredibly powerful, phenomenal skill. Because if I'm only touching, I'll put my hand up and say, the level of influence I'm having over the level of influence you guys can have, I'm probably at 1% of what you guys were able to achieve. So my big hat off to you guys, and thank you for the comments there. So you've actually cleared a conundrum from almost 30 years ago for me. Thanks.
Fantastic. Very kind of you to say, Shaquille. We're just winding up, but I think we've got time for one more question or point. Craig, welcome up to the stage. Are you there, Craig?
I think if you unmute yourself, it's the bottom right-hand corner, Craig.
Hello. So I'm arriving late to this discussion. That's the same as Shaquille. So I'm wondering, do you think it is more important to have a talent for hypnotic language, or providing the person in front of you with an experience that will surprise them and get them into a state where they are going to receive suggestions? For me, I don't class myself as talented in hypnotic language, although I've read a lot about it and watched a lot of videos, and I know quite a few people who are very talented at it. I don't class myself, but I'd still be able to get some results without using that.
I think that a presupposition that they're going to have the desired result is a large part of this. I think our congruence in the way we present ourselves in that dynamic of the relationship between hypnotist and cooperator, I suppose would be a good way of putting it, is as important as language. And I think the language will come naturally anyway when we put that presupposition in. And it's the same as rapport. You can do all the matching and mirroring stuff, and it will work. But just assuming that you have rapport with someone will instantly create that rapport, I think, in a much easier and more powerful way. So just to basically treat everyone like they're your old friend that you've not seen for a while, and that they're going to have the shifts and changes that you expect them to have, can be as powerful as anything else, I think. I don't know if that answers your question, Craig.
Yeah, I think yes. Yes, it does.
And I think that, hypnotic language is also, a very learnable skill. It just requires, the kind of environment where you can test stuff out, certain phrases, different environments, and it doesn't matter if that's in a therapy room or just with conversations, because, that's a good opportunity to try out different language patterns and effectively it's that, classic, phrase, sensory acuity, paying attention to the response you get when you do use different language patterns to see which is, more effective and helps you achieve the outcome that you want. So thanks for coming up, Craig, and really appreciate that question. Time has flown by. We are at 10 o'clock. It's been an hour, and we've covered a lot of ground here in terms of different elements of hypnotic languages, whether it's kind of metaphors, tonality, inner dialogue, all these kind of ways in which we communicate both to ourselves and other people really can. And for me, it really is a double-edged sword. It can supercharge your life, but it can also, if it's used against you, kind of dampen your life and enable you to get less out of life. So I think just an awareness of how you use language to other people and to yourself is a very powerful thing. But even if it isn't as you want it to be, as long as we have that, belief of responsibility, we've got the ability to change it and not, some people will say, well, I'm a bad communicator, I'm a good communicator. No, this is just how you communicate right now. And that can change with time if you, invest time and effort. Quick summary from you, Rowan?
Yeah, I think what sort of strikes me is if we work within our own inner dialogue, our own inner language, and perfect that as much as we can. Like what Bob was saying, he's worked with this so much that he's internalized it to a level where he doesn't have to worry about it. And I think once you get to that point, you start to just effectively emanate this stuff with other people. And I think, quite often I've had people say things to me like I'm manipulative. It was something that an ex-girlfriend said to me. And I sat with that for about a year and meditated on it and came to the conclusion that yes, I am. But manipulation is something that we do. We've got thumbs. We can manipulate tools. And whether that manipulation is win-win or win-lose or lose-win determines whether it's charity or a mutual benefit or manipulation in the sort of negative sense of it. So use your language to manipulate your own thoughts. And if you can quieten up and tidy up the way you think in your head, then you'll start to have a more positive effect on everyone around you, I think.
Absolutely. I would agree with that. So, it's not static, it's evolvable. And let's all supercharge our own lives with our own language to ourselves and other people. Thank you so much for everyone that's come up on stage. Really appreciate that. To everyone in the audience that were quietly listening, really appreciate your time and attention. We'll be doing another one of these next Thursday, same time. If you have any suggestions of topics that we can cover, feel free to connect. There's that little aeroplane thing. You can message us with any ideas, or you can connect on Instagram, send us a direct message. And we're quite happy to have the narrative, these topics, as a reflection of what you want to talk about and what you want to hear about. So please do connect with us. Thank you again for your time and your attention, and we'll see you next week. Take care.
Massive thanks, everyone. We shall see you next week.
Thank you for all the help and support and the answers to the questions you gave. Cheers, thanks.
No worries. Take care.
Take care.